is Alice in Muggerland, with the man who would be Hufflepuff, Bilious McDaniels, and Alice, the mudblood who joined the Hogwarts Express.
Hey, Alice.
What, Bill?
I have another question for you.
Oh, okay.
This comes from Yancey Osprey in the Division of Magical Sports. If you were going to add magic to a Muggle sport, which sport would it be?
Ooh, that is a great question. I think it is going to take magic to make golf interesting. So my answer is golf.
How would you add magic to golf?
How would I add magic to golf? I think that occasionally the ball should disappear into some kind of portal and come out somewhere else completely unrelated. I think that could be very entertaining. So, guy hits the ball, it goes sailing through the air, suddenly it disappears, and then it drops on a caddy's head somewhere else on the green. That's my suggestion. I would watch that.
Magic and golf.
Yeah.
All right.
Golf is literally the only sport I don't like watching. So I can make it through any other sport, but not golf. So also, it would be fun if sometimes that would happen to the announcers. So they'd be like, Tiger Woods is approaching the 9th hole. We'll see if he can get out of this slump. And ouch, man, that ball just dropped right on my head. Anyway, I don't know. I think that would be funny.
All right. So, what isn't funny, or is funny depending on your viewpoint, is that we are on Chapter 14, Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. Say that 10 times fast.
No.
So, this is after the holidays and the Quidditch and everything, and we find ourselves basically getting ready for spring. It looks.
Where we find ourselves is Hermione getting ready for exams. I mean, that sets the tone for this chapter. Hermione is cramming away for the exams, which are a mere 10 weeks hence from the time of this chapter. So that's a thing. She's very concerned. Harry and Ron are less so, but that's not surprising.
With the exam fever, they are in the Easter holidays, which are, according to the book, are a lot more stressful than the Christmas holidays because of these exams.
And the amount of homework that is being piled on them by their teachers in preparation for the exams, presumably.
And we have our trio cramming in the library.
Yeah, and we have a character appear in the library that you wouldn't actually expect to have appear in the library in the form of one Hagrid. So the kids know that something is up because Hagrid is in the library, and that just doesn't seem typical.
Yep, and he says that he would speak to them about the stone later on, but not to talk about it in public, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, he basically says, I'm not promising to tell you anything, but I'm definitely not going to tell you anything while we're here where we can be overheard, which seems pretty reasonable. So he invites them to his place for a more private discussion on the stone. He seems a little taken aback that they already know who Nicholas Flamel is.
But before we go there, you got to remember that Ron finds out that he was looking up books on dragons beforehand.
Exactly. So they decide to see, well, what section would Hagrid be drawn to? And I got to be honest, I was expecting it to be cookbooks. Not cookbooks, dragons. Pretty exciting.
And this is where I think that the parts of the series gives Ron credit in regards to this, because he's able to give those little bit of facts that Harry and Hermione might not know about or might not have studied. Like, for example, he was able to explain the whole entire thing of the dragons being outlawed, dragon breeding being outlawed, and all the issues with having to cover up problems with dragons all across the country.
Yeah, this was kind of an interesting moment because Hermione is usually the fount of wisdom for this trio. And in this case, her muggledom, is muggledom a term? Anyway, her muggle background means that she doesn't, this is not common knowledge for her. If she knows about this, it's from a book. Ron is right there with all of the history about the wizard world and dragons. He has some firsthand well, I guess, a personal connection to dragons in the form of his brother Charlie, who's in Romania, studying dragons, I believe. It's kind of a interesting occupation. I have to admit that if I were in this universe, I would probably also want to go off and study dragons. So, pretty cool.
So yeah, these are the things that I think Ron brings to the series. He brings the common knowledge that might not be written in every single book. This happens a lot more through the series. And I think that's helpful in regards to pushing things along. Just like it gets pushed along all the way to Hagrid's cabin.
They head over to Hagrid's place as agreed. They get there. It's described as being a warm day, and the cabin is even hotter because Hagrid has a big furious fire going. That's kind of interesting. They don't really get that much more information about the sorcerer, the philosopher's stone, because they get distracted by this whole dragon thing, but they do get some key information, and part of that information is that there are a number of professors who help to protect the stone, which Hagrid essentially confirms that's what's being hidden in in Hogwarts and being guarded by Fluffy. But it's not just Professor Quirrell, who they were afraid was going to crack, but who hasn't cracked yet. I like it's almost a throwaway line that references the fact that he's looking even paler than normal, but that means that he hasn't cracked yet. So, go Professor Quirrell. He has a stammer and a backbone. Pretty cool. But they find out that among the professors who are helping to protect the Philosopher's Stone is Professor Snape. It sounds like he's definitely playing both sides. And it's an interesting question whether or not his contribution to the protection of the stone is legitimate or not. If he was just involving himself so he could learn more about how the stone was being protected. The other big piece of information we get from Hagrid regarding Fluffy, which is, of course, his contribution to protecting the stone, is that only two people know how to get past Fluffy, Hagrid and Dumbledore. So we can all rest assured that nobody's getting past Fluffy anytime soon, because the only two people who know how to do that at Hogwarts are Hagrid himself and Dumbledore. Was I talking too much?
Oh, innocent child. Oh, innocent child.
Was I talking too much? Is that the music that tell me to shut up? Anyway.
No. That's the music that, of course, the book wouldn't be a book if someone didn't get.
I would like to point out, though, that there's very little of this book left. So whoever is going to get past Fluffy is going to have to do it real fast. He's running out of pages.
Okay, I'm gonna put this on Front Street right away. It would have been absolutely hilarious if the end of the book was really like, oh, and Professor Snape got eaten by Fluffy. The end.
I approve. I feel like that's very succinct.
However, the meat of the chapter happens after they get the details.
Right, so we have forwarded the plot a little bit, which is kind of what this book does. You get this little morsel of the plot being forwarded, and you get a whole lot of Quidditch, which is boring, and dragons, which are awesome. Dragons, of course, have a long and storied history way, way back, going all the way back to the Bible and the Book of Job. You have Leviathan, who is a dragon. More commonly, dragons appear in Beowulf, and the story from the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Of course, my personal favorite dragon is the Jabberwock. He is a fearsome dragon-like beast, and I have a warm, fuzzy spot for him in my heart. So dragons are fairly common. What is interesting to me is the the similarity here to the description of the dragon egg itself and how it's hatched to the very, very popular television series, and of course books before then, which I have to admit I haven't read, but I have seen the television series Game of Thrones. So George R.R. Martin has his dragons being hatched in fire. So the question that this raised for me, of course, immediately was, who did this first? Who hatched the dragon eggs in fire? Was it J.K. Rowling? Or was it George R.R. Martin? And it turns out that A Song of Fire and Ice, which is the first novel in the George R.R. Martin series, was published in 1996, which is very, very close, but is actually first for having the dragon eggs being hatched in fire. Now, I'm not saying first overall, I just mean first between this story and this and the George R.R. Martin books, because when you read this chapter about the dragon egg and hatching it in the fire and the way the egg is described, its appearance even, you can't help but to think, of that amazing scene in the first season of the Game of Thrones television series where Daenerys, throws herself into the fire and is reborn with baby dragons. So that's pretty cool. Again, so quick recap, we have A Song of Fire and Ice in 1996 and The Philosopher's Stone in 1997. It's entirely possible that these were two independent ideas that were hatched. So anyway, yes, I just thought it was interesting that right around this time we have two books coming out, one definitely for adults, one for kids, both in the fantasy world, that have this modus operandi for hatching dragon's eggs. I'm sure it goes much later or earlier than that. There are probably lots and lots of books that have hatched dragon eggs in fire. It's kind of a cool visual. Again, back in 2011, you have the television show, which does it so stunningly with its first season. So yes, basically for the rest of this chapter, I was picturing Hagrid wearing the same outfit as Daenerys in Game of Thrones. So that's a little personal insight to you from me, and you're welcome for that mental picture.
Starting next week's, folks, Alice in Westeros.
I like it. It's got a good ring to it. Yeah, so interesting. Dragons are very cool. Unsurprisingly, the kids go back to school, but we're all just kind of waiting around for the egg to be hatched. There's some details in here that I think are interesting. You've got Hagrid is slacking on his work because dragons. But dragons are highly illegal. So what Hagrid is doing is putting himself at great peril for his job. Not just because he's slacking, but also because they're outlawed. You're not allowed to have a dragon. He says this funny thing. He won the dragon in a card game. I like to think that game was bridge, but who knows? And he said that the guy who lost the egg was kind of happy to get rid of it. So that was kind of an interesting detail because it's a very valuable item, this dragon egg. Again, illegal, but valuable. So Hagrid sends an owl to the kids saying that the dragon is hatching. They do attend their class because Hermione insists, but then they race down there just in time for the blessed event. And the description of the dragon is looking like a wet umbrella. Not very appealing, but Hagrid is immediately smitten and in love and starts referring to himself as the dragon's mama right away, which is, again, Hagrid, mother of dragons. Kind of funny. So, the dragon starts to grow. Its diet was interesting to me. I mean, the dragon is fed brandy mixed with chicken blood, which sounds like some kind of hipster cocktail, but apparently that's what dragons are raised on. I guess that's how they light the fires, the alcohol content. I don't know how that works.
Another thing that we overlooked is during this whole entire time of the dragon hatching, Malfoy knows.
So Malfoy knows because he's just like, did you ever watch that show Bewitched? Malfoy is basically the Gladys Kravitz of Hogwarts. He's constantly like peering in windows and seeing and overhearing things that he shouldn't and can't explain fully, but he knows that something's going on. He follows them to Hagrid's cottage. he sees the blessed event through the window and scurries off back to Hogwarts. So he knows that Hagrid has a dragon. The interesting thing is that he doesn't tell anybody right away, at least not that we know of. So it's interesting to wonder what he was planning on doing with this key piece of information. But it does make Hagrid getting involved with caring for the dragon while it's a baby, and it makes it even more dangerous again, because if he gets caught with this, it's going to be big trouble for Hagrid. It's also kind of a nasty baby. Like, it keeps nipping and scratching at people, and Hagrid loves it, but it doesn't seem to love him necessarily, or anybody else for that matter.
Well, you've always said that you hate kids.
I would not have actually cried that much if some kid had gotten eaten by the dragon. I would have been a little disappointed if it was Hermione, I gotta be honest, but I think we could have sacrificed Ron at this point in the story. Anyway, moving on. So, the dragon, Norbert, it's a good name for a dragon, I guess. Norbert is growing at an alarming rate, and they realize they've got to get rid of this dragon. Hagrid, even though he loves the dragon and is his mama, he admits that he has to get rid of the dragon. So they contact Charlie by Al again to find out if he'll take him to the wilds of Romania and release him there. And Charlie agrees, and they set up a plan. Unfortunately, they do this in writing, because how else are you going to communicate via owl? It would be kind of cool if the owls were like singing telegrams. That would be neat. So they have this letter. Ron manages to get himself bit by the dragon, which is apparently also poisonous. Who knew? You'd think getting bit by a dragon would be bad enough. Ron gets bit by the dragon, is laid up in medical, and Malfoy comes up and pretends he wants to borrow a book from him, just to have some pretense for coming up to confirm that he's been bit by the dragon. And Ron gives him a book that has a copy of the letter in it. So now Malfoy is in on their plan for releasing this dragon to some friends of Charlie. Complicated, but that's where we're at. Ron, kind of a doofus. Don't just keep the letter with your secret plans lying around and, sticking it in a book somewhere where it's going to get lost. That is one of kind of my favorite things. When I go to the library or I buy a used book and I find some postcard or a letter or even a receipt from the last person who read the book tucked in, and they've been using it as a bookmark. It's kind of this neat view into the life of another person. But my point is, things that you stick in books occasionally get lost and stay in books. So this was not a good plan on Ron's part. So Malfoy knows what their plans are, but they still have an ace up their sleeve. They have the invisibility cloak. If you'll imagine, the three kids, the dragon, the invisibility cloak, and Hagrid basically bundles the dragon up for them, puts a little teddy bear in his cage, which apparently immediately gets ripped to shreds. And they carry this dragon up to the top of the tower. And again, this book basically says none of them really remember how they got up to the top of the tower. So I don't know if they just teleported themselves there, or if it was a long and drawn out thing that was very painful. So they all blocked the memory. I'm not sure how they got there. And even the author is like, they got there. Okay. On their way there, a very interesting thing happens. They see Malfoy get busted for lurking around. So again, Malfoy has not ratted them out. He wanted to confront them himself. And I think Malfoy wanted this dragon. Just personally, I think that's what was going on. So the kids meet up with Charlie's friends successfully. They even have some kind of harness thing rigged up so that they can fly off with this dragon. All sounds very cool. And they do that. And then the kids leave the tower without the cloak of invisibility and immediately get busted. So, great plan, great execution, right up to the last minute where they get caught. But at least they don't have a dragon with them, because that would have been harder to explain. And that is literally where the chapter ends. They've gotten busted for being out past curfew. and no explanation for why they're out past curfew, and no cloak of invisibility, which I'm afraid might get lost if it's left up at the top of the tower. Good news is it's kind of hard to see. So this is a moment where I would really like to be able to read further, but these are the rules of the game. I don't get to read any further until we're ready to record the next podcast. Alas, I'm stuck.
Well, at least you can't read it further until after we're done recording this podcast, and you get...
Yes, so as soon as we
good.
get done with this, I get to read further, which will be, a happy thing for me, because I want to find out what happens now that the kids have been busted by Filch. I'm sure they will come up with some crazy explanation, better than the one that Malfoy came up with, which got him detention.
So in this chapter, in the book so far, who is your favorite character?
In this chapter, the book is continuing to, I still like Hermione a lot, still like Professor McGonagall a lot. In this chapter, though, I'm gonna have to go with Norbert, because I relate to him on a deep level. I like, to consume alcohol without chicken's blood, and I am inclined to bite people. So.
And you rip
Norbert.
heads off teddy bears?
Absolutely. I actually have quite a few stuffed animals, but none of them are teddy bears.
All right, folks, that's the end of chapter 14, Norbert the Norwegian Ridgeback. In the next chapter, chapter 15, we have 3 more chapters to go. The next chapter being titled The Forbidden Forest.
Ooh.
You could check us out and communicate more with us on our Facebook page. Just go to www.facebook.com/Alice in Muggleland. And Alice also has a Twitter, but to be quite honest, neither of us really use Twitter that much. But her Twitter is her Twitter is A in Muggleland. And I am also not on Twitter, so don't worry about Twittering me. And we also would like you to go through and review, like, and subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use, especially if you use iTunes. Please rate us and leave a review. And we're now on everywhere that you get your podcasts, including Spotify. So is there anything else that you'd like to add before we shove off, Alice?
No, I think we've said it all.
All right, then. Well, folks, thanks again. See you next week. Knox.
I don't know if you'll be able to hear this or not, but this is the key sound for our podcast. Could you hear that?
Just that boom.
Yep. It's the sound of me taking a cork out of a bottle of bourbon.
As long as it's not...
I love that piece of music, though.